Tonight, we're wrapping up our special edition of the Chicago Report. Number 5, the Illinois General Assembly works to the 11th hour to avoid a transit fiscal cliff. Number 4, Governor Pritzker heads to Washington, D.C. and gets grilled by Republicans on Capitol Hill. Number 3, a public breakup between CPS and Pedro Martinez amid CPS funding woes. Number 2, the Pope. From the south suburbs to Vatican City, Chicago has a new celebrity. And can you guess which story took the number 1 spot? It's all ahead on the Chicago Report.
Certainly can't be much of a surprise there. Now, welcome to this Chicago Report special, the biggest political stories of the year, part 2. Last night we featured stories 10 through 6, and tonight it's the top 5 stories of the year. A year that was full of triumph, tragedy, drama, comedy, and a lot of questions for 2026. We start tonight with a historic state bill to provide $1.5 billion in new funding every year to mass transit, helping the CTA, PACE, and Metro avert a fiscal cliff. Supporters actually say it'll do more than that. They're promising safer, cleaner, more reliable service and a more integrated system to help boost ridership. We debated the measure multiple times on the Chicago Report, and Democratic House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch visited us right after the fall veto session to take a victory lap.
This was a good bill. We were going to have to pay for it some way. And this was a bill that I agreed with, the Senate agreed with, the governor agreed with, labor agreed with. Principals came together and put this bill together. And it's a good bill. Is it a perfect bill? No. But this is a bill that brings necessary reforms to the system, and it's fully paid for. And year after year, these systems that needed it can look forward to this funding. And now it's going to be transformative. We're going to be able to have safety and reliability. That's going to increase ridership. It's going to be a world-class system for a world-class city.
You know, the other thing that Leader McCombie had said is that the fiscal cliff was only around $230 million at the end of the day. This is $1.5 billion. So what do you get for that extra $1.2 billion?
Well, one of the things we heard about in all of the work we've done over the last 2 years is that we have to improve the system. That in order to bring riders back that we lost because of COVID, we have to increase reliability. Some things need to change to increase reliability, better coordination of all of the systems, better collaboration of all of these different fiefdoms, and we have to improve safety. That costs money. There's a new multi-jurisdictional law enforcement agency that's going to help keep these trains and buses safe. Reliability, safety equals ridership, and that costs money.
Can we assume the days of ghosting buses are going to be in the past with this regular service, 8 or 10 minutes apart, the way people want it to be?
I tell you, I believe the new NITA board, the Northern Illinois Transportation Authority Board, which is going to be a board that brings about accountability, is going to eliminate all of that type of stuff. I believe we got it right, and that's why we took our time. We took our time, we got it right. This was done in a bipartisan way. Representative Stevens in the House, Senator Seth Lewis in the Senate. We got it right, because there's a lot of things that we do that Republicans don't even vote for at all. And I think that was a testament to them acknowledging that this was a good piece of legislation.
Story number 4, you've heard of the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Well, we had 2 versions of that this year. First, Mayor Johnson goes to Washington, and then second, Mr. Governor Pritzker goes to Washington. Like the mayor's visit, Republicans in the House didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for the governor, who appeared before the Oversight Committee to answer questions about Illinois' sanctuary laws. Governor Pritzker took the heat from Republican members of the House Oversight Committee for more than 8 hours today. Pritzker on the witness stand with fellow governors Walz of Minnesota and Hochul of New York for this hearing on sanctuary state policies. Now, the Republicans on this committee claimed that the governors are breaking the law by allowing these policies to continue, but then Pritzker and others turned the tables on them and said it's Trump and Republicans that are violating law by calling the National Guard up to California without the consent of Governor Gavin Newsom. And in the last few hours, a federal judge did rule in favor of Gavin Newsom. Now, the questioning
was personal at times, it was heated at times, and it was very political all the time, like this exchange between Pritzker and Colorado firebrand Lauren Boebert.
I find it hard to believe that you're lecturing us
Yes or
about
no?
peaceful protest. You look at what
Yes or
happened
no?
January 6th here at the Capitol.
No, what we're
The
seeing in
attack
LA
on
is
our
an
democracy.
insurrection. You want to talk about
That
an
is an
insurrection? This is an
insurrection.
absolute insurrection.
You don't understand what insurrection
I
is
asked
when
you a
people are
yes or
trying to
no
overturn
question,
an
sir.
election
And I'm
here at
showing,
the Congress.
I started this off
You
showing
were
you
here.
the
They were
forum, and I would
attacking you, by
respect
the way.
the same. I would expect the same.
I'm answering your question. It is outrageous.
it-
You are asking
is
us
it
these
peaceful
questions when you're the one condoning
to destroy
pardoning of people who attack
private and
police
government property?
right here at our
Governor
Capitol.
Hochul?
Politics plays a huge role in what happened today. There are people seeking higher office,
This is
including
show
possibly
business.
the governor.
That's what I mean about a
So
circus.
unpack all that,
This
what you
is
saw
all,
there.
Well, this is all show business. I mean, you have Mary Miller, and frankly, I was looking very much to see if she would show up for this opportunity to talk to Governor Pritzker, because she normally does it by tweets or whatever social media you want to call. And she is not the brightest bulb in Congress. I'm just
Okay.
going to be very honest about that. I mean, the other day she was called out for referring to why are we having a Muslim deliver the house prayer? It was a Sikh. And then she said, why are we having a Sikh do it?
She also
And
said
then the
Hitler was right
Republicans-
about one
well,
thing.
and then you saw this thing about Hitler, which to a Jewish governor is not
You
exactly...
could tell that she has gotten under his skin.
Because she throws out all these things, which plays well in this downstate congressional district. But if you ask people, what has she done for that district? And they may support her because she's a loyal Trump supporter.
And the culture war issues really play.
But what have you brought? I mean, the neighboring congressional district, Mike Bost, who was in a big battle, if you remember, against
With Darren
Bailey.
Bailey.
And I talked to Mike Bost about Bost takes earmarks, okay? And at one time that was a bad thing or a good thing. And I said, well, Mary Miller doesn't take earmarks. He said, I'll take them. Bring them over here. If she doesn't want to give her people anything.
So they're very similar ideologically, but it sounds like he's bringing more bacon home to his district. But I want to get into Darren LaHood, who might run for Senate on the Republican side. And then you have Raja Krishnamurthy. How about this dynamic? He is throwing the softest of softballs up to the governor,
Well,
even though he's running for Senate.
There's a
and
reason.
Governor Pritzker is endorsing his opponent.
That's the reason.
Unpack all of that.
Well, that's the reason, though. He's not going to get into a fight, in a big, visible fight in that stage. He's not going to get into that fight with Governor Pritzker,
And it sounded
whose lieutenant governor is his
That's
chosen
Juliana Strand.
candidate,
It sounded like
Julia
Pritzker's
Strand.
team wrote those talking points for Krishnamurthy.
And that's our good friend Rick Pearson, senior political reporter at the Chicago Tribune, weighing in on that historic day. And when we come back to top 3 stories of the year, including some divine intervention. Welcome back. Story number 3 this year actually carried over from the year prior. Remember how the Chicago Board of Education, after a months-long battle, finally decided to fire CPS CEO Pedro Martinez? Not before he successfully sued the board and the teachers union to stay out of their contract negotiation process. So this year, the two sides finally settled that negotiation, and then the mayor's hand-picked new CPS superintendent in the interim did the unthinkable. She, too, went against the mayor. She advocated for a CPS budget that resisted a huge loan that the mayor wanted, and eventually she persuaded most of the board to go along with her. Another political defeat for the mayor and budget peace for at least some of the next year. And we had many spirited debates featuring CTU members, board members, and more here on the Chicago Report.
We have not included adding to our $9 billion debt burden as a strategy to close the FY26 budget gap.
CPS Budget Director Mike Sitkowski says a proposed $200 million borrowing scheme could be the death knell for the school district's long-term finances.
Borrowing for operating expenses would send the district into a downward spiral of credit downgrades, higher interest rates, and steeper cuts to staff, program, and services in the future.
Today, Sitkowski and new CEO Macquillan King's leadership team unveiled their 2026 budget to the Board of Education. They say they'll close the budget gap without the borrowing and by pushing a $175 million employee pension payment onto the city. That is, unless the city or the state come through with additional funding to cover it. The plan was met with skepticism from board member Makilla Blaze, who was appointed by Mayor Johnson.
We have to work with folks. We have to be good partners. We have to collaborate. And if we're going to act like we don't care about the city budget, why should they care about ours?
The budget plan is the exact approach that former CEO Pedro Martinez took before he was fired for refusing the short-term high-interest loan pushed by both the mayor and the Chicago Teachers Union. Some parents groups offered praise to CPS leaders today for pushing back on those plans.
Thank you, Dr. King, for making the decision to protect classrooms by rejecting the $175 million MEABF payment and avoiding new high-interest debt. This decision shows a real commitment to putting families first, even in the face of intense pressure.
CPS leaders say they'll close the gap through TIF money, debt restructuring, and cuts outside of the classroom. And some more specifics on that. It's $126 million in non-classroom cuts they're proposing, some one-time funding sources, and debt refinancing. And joining us with some reaction is Joe Ferguson, president of the Civic Federation, along with board members Debbie Pope and Jennifer Custer. Thank you all for being here. I'll start with you, board member Pope. Some controversial elements here, pushing off that pension payment and no to some of that borrowing. Is this a budget you can vote yes on?
No, I'm not comfortable with not fulfilling a promise that had been made and not fulfilled last year to the city. And part of why I'm not comfortable with it is the 28 alders signed a letter to us after we did not pay that money last year saying we gave you the excess TIF, the maximum TIF that we've ever given, and we gave it to you with this expectation. And you can't count on us doing this for you if you are not going to do your part to pay the MEABF. The majority of MEABF payments go to people who are annuitants, who worked for CPS, and I do believe that it is our obligation to assist in covering their pensions, and I do believe that there is a way to do that and to avoid any cuts to the classroom and to avoid the threat of mid-year cuts if we don't get the TIF money. Okay, and MEBF, that is the pension payment. Jennifer Custer, what about that? This should be the CPS's responsibility.
Say that again.
Should that be the CPS's responsibility?
The MEABF payment?
Right.
You know, by law, it's not. So the law states that it's not our payment to make. And I will say that, you know, last year we were granted $300 million in TIF, or roughly $300 million in TIF. But the difference is we didn't actually sign an IGA. That IGA was pulled from our agenda back in March, and we never agreed upon it. So it's hard for alders to say, well, we gave you this in lieu of, you know, with promises of this, because we didn't actually ever vote to agree on that at all. Hence why we didn't make the MEABF payment. So I think no, it's not really our responsibility. We didn't promise anything. We didn't agree to an IGA, and we didn't even get the opportunity to voice our votes on that budget amendment last year, but we will get the opportunity to do so this year. And I think that this is a budget that is presented that protects kids, protects families, protects communities, and protects schools.
The number 2 political story of the year, you can say it's the age-old tale of a hometown boy making good, perhaps with some divine intervention attached. Catholic Cardinal Robert Prevost, born in Chicago, raised in Dalton, educated at Hyde Park's Catholic Theological Union, and holding many positions in Chicago's south suburbs before leading a mission in Peru and then being elevated to the Vatican. He was elected by his peers to become the first American-born Pope ever, donning the hat as Pope Leo XIV. And earlier this year, we visited with the Pope Whisperer, author Christopher White, who traced Leo's journey from the South Side to Rome. And he gave us the inside scoop on the most secretive process in the world.
you described this hornet's nest that the College of Cardinals walked into after Francis died, and that Pope Leo is now in charge of. Describe the hornet's nest for us.
Well, I think after 12 years of Pope Francis' papacy, which I think if you love Pope Francis, if you hated Pope Francis, you certainly have to recognize the fact that he initiated a major era of change in the Catholic Church. He wanted the Church to become more welcoming, more participatory. And when he died, the Cardinals had to decide, do we want to continue on this path? And in electing Cardinal Prevost, I think it was certainly clear that they signaled they wanted someone who shared Pope Francis's priorities, but was perhaps a different style of leader. Cardinal Prevost, now Leo the 14th, is an introvert. He's a cautious man. Francis was a great extrovert, so they have different styles.
And Francis made a big, I don't want to say show, but he made a big deal of being with the people, not having all the trappings. We'll see how Prevost handles that. But, you met him for the first time in 2023 when he was working in the Vatican. Tell us what that encounter was like.
Sure. So Pope Francis brought him to Rome from Peru, where he had been serving as a bishop, to head what was really, I think, one of the Vatican's most important and powerful offices, the office responsible for vetting and identifying potential Catholic bishops around the world. He arrived, he's all of a sudden the most important American in Rome. So I reached out, and he didn't want to do an interview because it's a very sensitive office, but he invited me in to meet with him. And so the first time I met him, we spent about an hour together, and he had tons of questions for me. I was there, of course, to learn about him and his priorities and what he was thinking of doing with the office. But he interrogated me a bit about what I thought of the United States Church, why there was such a hub of resistance to Pope Francis. So he struck me then in that first encounter, and this certainly played out of the time that I got to know him, as someone who really does his homework.
And it seems like he's viewed, even though he's born in Chicago from the United States, he's viewed more as a Latin American, South American figure, as evidenced by him asking you questions about the church in the United States. But he did grow up in Dalton. How did Chicago shape who he is and his philosophy?
Well, I think, he has a very common American, all Chicago story. He's got this sort of family with all this multi-ethnic background. And I think from an early age, his horizons were set beyond just Chicago, but rooted here. And I think that sort of is key to understanding him. He's a person who's rooted, but with a global vision. And you can trace that back to his backyard here in Dalton.
And he spent many years in Peru, and in fact, that was sort of what shaped him as a pastor, was it not?
Yeah, he always said that Peru was where he became a pastor. And I think, this was important to his election. He was from the United States, but he had a bridge to Latin America, a bridge to Europe, because he studied in Europe, and then later was the head of his religious order living in Europe. And so a lot of the College of Cardinals sort of saw him as this global missionary, not so much as your caricature American that perhaps would have put off some people for voting for an American.
So maybe it made him a little more palatable, because
I think so.
Conventional wisdom was they'll never elect an American pope, but here we are. Take us inside the Vatican and the conclave. When that door closes, what happens between that period and the time you see the white smoke?
Yeah, it's the most secretive election process on earth. They don't have access to television. Their phones have been confiscated. Those of us on the outside aren't able to talk to them, so we don't really know what's happening. Look, the voting process itself is quite formal. They have to cast their ballots. They, swear before God that they're casting a vote for the person that they think is most qualified to be Pope. And then when they leave the Sistine Chapel for their lunch times, their dinner times, they have some sidebar conversations, and that's where the real work of the conclave happens. There are no speeches inside the Sistine Chapel, but in the Vatican, in the house where they're all sort of boarded up for however long it takes, that's when they're jockeying and they're talking about, could this guy do the job? What do you know about him? Who are you prioritizing?
Kind of sounds like a Cook County slating process. So how did Prevost make it from round to round to round and then emerge as the person with the majority? And then what was that moment like when he found out?
Yeah, so, he was elected on the 4th ballot, which I think surprised people that the white smoke appeared so soon, because this was a big conclave with, 133 people. Most of them didn't know each other. So some people thought, oh, this is going to go on for a long period of time. Really, in that second ballot that they cast on that, that Thursday morning, his numbers begin to tick up right away. And then it was pretty much decisive after that. It requires a 2/3 majority. And in the second to last round of voting, he was actually the one that had been elected to read out the names. So he would have been reading his name, Prevost, 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 over and over again. So it's kind of exciting to think about, just what daunting responsibility that is. You're reading the names aloud and realizing you might become Pope.
Probably a wave of panic perhaps setting in. And there's a scene in your book where once he finds out his head is in his hands, or once he knows he's going to emerge, I mean, he's just like, oh my God.
Yes, the cardinal sitting next to him, just saw him with his head in his hands, and he asked him, would you like some candy? He had snuck some candy into the Sistine Chapel, and he said yes.
There you go. All you needed to know about the conclave that produced the first American Pope. And when we come back, the #1 political story of the year. Stay tuned. The #1 story of the year, a story that has been in heavy rotation since September, when the Department of Homeland Security announced the beginning of Operation Midway Blitz. The intensified deportation efforts brought nearly daily protests to ICE facilities, the one in Broadview especially, with some of those protests getting into heated clashes between law enforcement and demonstrators. It brought disruption and danger to residential communities with constant motorcades, tear gassing, confrontations with protesters. Federal judges ruled many of these altercations unconstitutional on the part of federal immigration agents with an unapproved use of force that violated First Amendment rights. And it introduced Chicago to the controversial and attention-seeking frontman, Customs and Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino, who showed up in Little Village and Evanston and all points in between to lead the efforts. Now, we covered Operation Midway Blitz almost on a daily basis on Chicago Report, including early on, where this panel of onlookers and stakeholders agreed to disagree. Border Czar Holman had said the worst of the worst, violent criminals, but according to the Transaction Records Access Clearinghouse track, 71.5% of those detained did not have criminal convictions. Why is that?
Well, here's the thing, like we go after the worst of the worst. That's what ICE is doing. We're trying to get the worst first and get them off the streets. But during this administration, while we're out there going after the worst of the worst, if we do encounter somebody who is here illegally, we have to take action on those ones too, right? We're not gonna just turn a blind eye to somebody that we encounter who's illegal. Like we will arrest them as well. And so that could be the case.
Customs and Border Patrol Commander Bovino had said publicly comments like, he's basing it off look, he's basing it off a suspicion based off looks, off of certain tells, whether someone grips their steering wheel tighter. What does ICE use as reasonable suspicion to be able to question somebody and then detain them?
Mm-hmm. Our officers are highly trained, right? We go through many-month academy to be able to even get out on the street to perform enforcement operations. And like I said, most of our targeting, what we do is targeted enforcement. So we know a lot about the subject before we even go out into the field. So we're already going to know that somebody's amenable to arrest and amenable to removal from the U.S. And when we're out there doing target enforcement and encounter somebody who's not a target, that's when our officers are trained to how to question, right? They're trained into different indicators that can lead us to suspect that somebody could be here illegally. And sometimes we do use the consensual encounter, and that's just like, any law enforcement officer has that right. Just like you or I on the street could ask somebody if they want to talk to us. As long as that person feels free to leave, then we're good. Then it's not really a stop at that point.
The Trump administration, whether they know it or not, is sending us down a dark road. This is true for Chicago and for other parts of the country. It's not because as soon as federal troops come and land in Chicago, there's going to likely be an immediate explosion of political violence. It's not because the 101st Airborne is about to land at Wrigley Field. It's because the way military occupations by democracies, say Britain and Northern Ireland in August 1969, the way this happens is, and for good reasons, there's often the reason to de-escalate violence. Here, it's to lower crime in Chicago, to deal with the illegal alien problem in Chicago. The problem is there's usually a honeymoon period where things seem to go well for a few weeks, think DC right now, but over time, these missions get large. And the Chicago mission here, if we're gonna deport the undocumented immigrants from our city, that's 150,000 1,000 people from the city of Chicago. If we're going to really lower crime, I used to live in Oak Park, we've got to go into Austin. We've got to disarm, not just simply have a few people walking in downtown Michigan Avenue. So what happens, Paris, when that occurs, when the missions enlarge, is that you infringe on political liberties. Necessarily, it's not because the troops are trying to do that, it's because it's just part and parcel of what's going to occur.
But this is kind of like what Governor Pritzker has warned, that it could lead to protests that could get ugly, it could lead to confrontation. But I want to bring you in, Gary McCarthy, because this debate over whether the National Guard should be sent in, you know, you were police chief, the National Guard, as we know, they can get called up in these big, large-scale events. If there's riots, and their job is usually guarding critical infrastructure or maybe helping with crowd control. So is there a legitimate role in the day-to-day fighting of crime?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, if I was superintendent, I would not want somebody else to come here and do my job. Maybe it's my pride, but that's me. But the issue is this, to me. They're not going to be doing car stops. They're not going to be doing street stops. They're not going to be answering calls for service.
That's the top 10, and this story will probably continue into 2026. Questions or comments? Have a story you want us to look into? Email me at parisonpolitics@fox.com. That is it for our special. Hope you have a wonderful, warm, and safe holiday season. Have a great weekend, and we're back next week and, of course, next year. Good night, everybody.